2:13 a.m. Fire devoured the glass mansion on Ridgeline Drive as Ethan Blake stood frozen, watching his quiet, single-dad life about to explode. The woman's screams from the second floor cut through Pine Ridge's mountain air like shattered glass. His trembling fingers found the harmonica, 6 years untouched since Anna's death. 6 years since he'd buried his firefighting skills along with his wife. But those screams wouldn't let him hide anymore. His body moved without permission, muscles remembering what his mind had tried to forget. In 3 minutes, he would scale that burning building using parkour moves no small-town plumber should know. In 4 minutes, he would carry out a woman whose identity would destroy everything he thought was real. What she did after he saved her life would shock not just him, not just their small Montana town, but everyone who thought they understood the difference between rescue and love. Ethan's boots hit gravel as he sprinted towards the inferno. The mansion's glass walls reflected flames like a kaleidoscope of hell, each window a burning eye staring down at Pine Ridge's sleeping houses below. Smoke billowed thick and black against the star-scattered Montana sky. His lungs burned just breathing the air. The woman's voice grew weaker with each desperate cry for help. Fire department sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, but he knew they wouldn't make it in time. The old instincts kicked in: assess, plan, execute. His eyes tracked the building's structure, finding handholds where others saw only smooth walls. The parkour skills he'd learned as a young firefighter came flooding back like muscle memory. Wall run to the first-floor overhang. Precision jump to catch the second-floor balcony rail. Pull-up with arms that still remembered carrying bodies through smoke. Each movement felt like betraying Anna's memory, like admitting he was still the man who chose strangers over his own wife 6 years ago. But the screaming wouldn't stop. Neither would his legs. He hauled himself through the broken window into a world of orange heat and choking darkness. The smoke was thick enough to swim through, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. Inside the conference room, he found her collapsed beside an overturned table, designer clothes singed, blonde hair matted with soot. She was unconscious but breathing. Beautiful in that effortless way that screamed money and power, even with smoke stains across her cheeks. Ethan lifted her in his arms, lighter than he expected, fragile despite the expensive watch on her wrist. Her head rolled against his shoulder as he navigated back to the window. The flames had spread, turning his escape route into a gauntlet of heat and falling debris. Getting down would be harder than getting up. He rappelled down the building's exterior using techniques that would have impressed his old fire crew, the woman's weight balanced perfectly against his chest. His shoulders screamed, his lungs felt raw, but he didn't stop until they hit solid ground. Emergency vehicles flooded the driveway just as he laid her on the grass. Paramedics swarmed them both. In the chaos of oxygen masks and stretchers, he caught a glimpse of her eyes, startling blue, focused directly on him, with an intensity that made his breath catch. She was conscious. She'd been watching him. Then the ambulance doors slammed shut, and she was gone, leaving him standing in his soot-stained pajamas, wondering what the hell had just happened. The next morning brought reporters, phone calls, and a parade of neighbors asking questions Ethan couldn't answer. He sat on his porch with coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the blackened skeleton of the mansion. 12-year-old Zoe perched beside him, her dark hair still messy from sleep, brown eyes full of the worried intelligence that reminded him too much of Anna. She'd inherited her mother's ability to see straight through his lies. The harmonica sat between them on the wooden steps, looking innocent despite the chaos it had witnessed. He still couldn't bring himself to put it away. "You saved someone, Dad." Zoe's voice carried that careful tone she used when she knew he was hurting. "Mom would be proud." The words hit him like a physical blow. Anna would have been proud of the rescue, sure, but would she have been proud of how it felt? The rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of using skills he'd sworn to bury? The way his heart had raced, not just from exertion, but from being needed again? He'd promised Anna's memory that he'd never be a hero again, never choose strangers over family. Last night had felt too much like breaking that promise. Zoe leaned against his shoulder, small and warm, and everything good he had left in the world. The lady on the news said you were amazing. She called you a mystery hero. Mystery hero. If only they knew the real mystery, how a man could save someone's life and feel like he'd betrayed the most important person in his own. The hospital had released no information about the woman he'd rescued. No name, no condition, no statement of gratitude. It was like she'd vanished into the Montana morning, leaving only questions and the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with smoke. 3 days later, Ethan was elbow-deep in Janet Morrison's kitchen sink when the bell above Murphy's coffee shop door chimed behind him. He'd been avoiding the place since the fire, but the sink had finally given up its 40-year fight against Pine Ridge's mineral-heavy water. The coffee shop buzzed with its usual mix of ranchers, retirees, and the occasional tourist who'd gotten lost looking for Glacier National Park. He focused on the pipe wrench in his hands, trying to ignore the whispered conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. Being the town hero was more exhausting than being invisible. "Excuse me." The voice was soft, educated, with the kind of careful pronunciation that came from good schools and better breeding. "Are you the man who saved that woman from the fire?" Ethan looked up from the sink trap to find himself staring into the bluest eyes he'd ever seen. The woman was maybe 35, with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and no makeup except a light gloss on lips that looked like they smiled often. She wore jeans and a Pine Ridge Hardware t-shirt, but something about the way she carried herself suggested she'd never done manual labor in her life. "Depends who's asking." He straightened, wiping his hands on his work shirt. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that made him instantly suspicious. Women like this didn't just appear in Pine Ridge asking questions about local heroes. "You a reporter?" She laughed, and the sound was genuine enough to ease some of his tension. "God, no. I'm just someone who believes in saying thank you when it matters. I'm Alex, by the way. I'm new in town." She extended a hand that was soft but not pampered, with calluses in unexpected places. The handshake lasted exactly long enough to be polite, and not a second more. Alex ordered coffee and sat at the corner table while he finished his work, occasionally glancing over with a curiosity that felt more personal than professional. When he packed up his tools, she was waiting by the door. "Walk me out." It wasn't really a question. Outside, the September mountain air carried the first hint of winter, and the afternoon light made everything look like a postcard. Alex pulled a thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and turned to face him. "I heard about what you did. Climbing a burning building with no equipment, no backup. That takes serious skill. Takes serious stupidity." Ethan corrected, but her words stirred something he'd thought was dead. Pride, maybe. Or just the memory of who he used to be before guilt carved him hollow. Anyone would have done the same thing. Alex studied his face with an intensity that made him fidget. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have waited for the fire department. You moved like you knew exactly what you were doing. There was something in her voice, a knowledge that went deeper than observation. Like she understood more about emergency response than a tourist should. They walked slowly down Pine Ridge's main street, past the hardware store and the library and the little park where Zoe played after school. Alex asked careful questions about the town, about his work, about life in Montana. Normal conversation that felt anything but normal. She listened with the kind of attention that suggested every word mattered, filing away details he didn't remember sharing. When they reached the corner where he'd parked his truck, she hesitated. "Maybe I'll see you around town." The way she said it sounded more like a promise than a possibility. That evening, Ethan found himself watching for her during Zoe's soccer practice. She wasn't there, but he caught himself looking anyway. At dinner, Zoe peppered him with questions about the pretty lady Mrs. Morrison had seen him talking to outside the coffee shop. Small towns had no secrets, especially when those secrets involved their newly minted local hero spending time with a mysterious stranger. "Is she nice, Dad?" Zoe asked over spaghetti that had gone cold while they talked. "She seemed nice," he admitted, surprised by how much he wanted that to be true. Later that night, after Zoe was asleep, he sat on the back porch with the harmonica in his hands. For the first time in 6 years, he raised it to his lips. The first notes came out shaky, uncertain, like a voice that hadn't been used in too long. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and soon he was playing Amazing Grace. Anna's favorite song, the one she'd hummed while making breakfast on Sunday mornings. The melody drifted across his small backyard and into the Montana darkness. He didn't know that 3 blocks away, a woman named Alex was sitting by her cabin window, tears streaming down her face as she listened to music that sounded exactly like a prayer. The next afternoon brought Alex to his door with a water emergency that felt suspiciously convenient. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Morrison said you're the best plumber in town, and I have water shooting everywhere." She stood on his porch in jeans and a flannel shirt, looking perfectly normal except for the designer boots that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Behind her, Zoe was walking up the driveway with her school backpack and soccer cleats, timing that felt too perfect to be accidental. "Dad, who's this?" Zoe dropped her bag and studied Alex with the frank curiosity of someone who'd spent most of her life being the only female in their household. "This is Alex. She needs help with her plumbing." Alex knelt to Zoe's eye level with a natural grace that suggested she was comfortable around children. "You must be Zoe. Your dad told me you're an amazing soccer player." The compliment was simple, but Zoe's face lit up like Christmas morning. It had been a long time since a woman had shown interest in his daughter's life. At Alex's cabin, the plumbing problem turned out to be a loose connection that should have taken 10 minutes to fix. Somehow it stretched into 2 hours of conversation, with Zoe sprawled on the floor working on origami while Alex taught her increasingly complex folds. Watching them together stirred something in Ethan's chest that felt dangerously close to contentment. Alex had an engineer's understanding of angles and stress points, explaining the mathematics behind paper folding in ways that made Zoe's eyes shine with excitement. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "I studied engineering back east before I decided I needed a complete change of scenery," Alex said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away from a life that doesn't fit anymore." The words carried weight that went beyond career changes, and Ethan found himself nodding in recognition. He understood running from the past. What he didn't understand was why someone with her obvious intelligence and education would end up fixing plumbing in a Montana town most people couldn't find on a map. Over the next 2 weeks, Alex became a regular part of their routine in ways that felt natural rather than forced. She showed up at soccer practice with homemade cookies and cheered louder than any parent when Zoe scored her first goal of the season. She helped with homework, teaching long division with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching minds work. She fixed Ethan's ancient coffee maker with tools she claimed to have borrowed, but operated like she'd used them professionally. Each interaction revealed new skills that didn't quite match her story of being a burned-out office worker on an extended vacation. The evening everything changed started like any other. Alex had joined them for dinner, a simple meal of grilled cheese and tomato soup that somehow felt elegant when she helped prepare it. Zoe was in the living room afterward, practicing guitar while Ethan and Alex cleaned dishes together. The domestic scene felt so natural it scared him. "You're good at this," he said, watching her dry plates with the efficiency of someone who'd done it thousands of times. "At what?" "Being part of a family." The words slipped out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Alex went very still, the dish towel frozen in her hands. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." Before she could continue, Zoe's voice called from the living room. "Dad, come look." They found her at the window, pointing toward the highway where red and blue lights flashed against the gathering dusk. Emergency vehicles were racing toward the resort district, sirens wailing. Ethan's radio crackled to life. He still monitored emergency frequencies out of habit. "Structure fire at Pine Ridge Resort, multiple occupants trapped. All available personnel respond immediately." The words hit him like ice water. Pine Ridge Resort was a sprawling complex that hosted corporate retreats and weekend conferences. If there were people trapped, the volunteer fire department would be overwhelmed. His hands moved without conscious thought, reaching for the gear bag he'd never thrown away despite 6 years of telling himself he was done with emergencies. "Ethan, don't." Alex's voice was sharp with something that sounded like genuine fear. "Let someone else handle it." But he was already moving, muscle memory overriding rational thought. "Stay with Zoe. I'll be back." The resort was chaos when he arrived. 3 buildings were involved, with flames jumping between structures like living things hungry for destruction. The volunteer crew was doing their best, but they were outmatched, and everyone knew it. Guests streamed from the main lodge while staff tried to account for conference attendees scattered across multiple buildings. Battalion Chief Rodriguez spotted Ethan and jogged over, relief written across his smoke-stained face. "Blake, thank God. We've got people trapped in Conference Building C, 3rd floor. Can't get a ladder close enough, and the interior stairs are compromised." Ethan was already studying the building's structure, his mind calculating angles and access points with the cold efficiency that had made him one of the best rescue specialists in his old department. Conference Building C was a modern glass and steel structure designed more for aesthetics than emergency access. But he could see possibilities others might miss. Architectural details that could serve as handholds, exterior features that would support his weight. "I'll need rope and a safety harness," he told Rodriguez, "and someone who knows the building layout." "I know it." Alex appeared beside them, somehow having materialized in the chaos without him noticing. She wore jeans and hiking boots now, her casual clothes replaced by gear that looked suspiciously professional. "I've been in that conference room. Southwest corner, 3rd floor. 2 exits, but both are probably blocked by now." Rodriguez looked between them with questions in his eyes, but there wasn't time for explanations. "Can you get us there?" Alex nodded, her face grim but determined. "I can get you there. But Ethan, you should know." A window exploded on the 2nd floor, cutting off whatever she'd been about to say. Orange flames licked upward toward the conference room where people were trapped. There was no more time for conversation, no space for the growing list of questions about how Alex knew the building layout or why she'd appeared with professional grade gear. Ethan secured his harness and checked his equipment with the automatic precision of someone who'd done it hundreds of times. The familiar routine calmed his racing pulse, focused his mind on the task ahead. The climb was everything he remembered, and worse. Modern buildings weren't designed for external access, and each handhold had to be created or discovered through careful observation. His shoulders burned as he hauled himself up the building's face, using window frames and decorative elements as anchor points. Below him, Alex coordinated with the ground crew, her voice calm and professional over the radio. She spoke like someone who'd run emergency operations before, using terminology that went far beyond civilian knowledge. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit her story. The third-floor conference room contained 4 people. 3 middle-aged executives and a security guard who'd stayed behind to help evacuate. They were conscious but suffering from smoke inhalation, huddled near the far wall where the air was marginally cleaner. The room was a furnace, with flames visible through the doorway and spreading across the ceiling like a living organism. Ethan worked quickly, securing each person for the descent, while fighting the growing certainty that he wouldn't be able to get them all out before the building's structure failed. "Blake, you've got maybe 5 minutes before that floor collapses." Rodriguez's voice crackled through his radio. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." Ethan looked at the 4 people depending on him, then at the window that was their only escape route. 4 people, 1 rope, 1 chance. The mathematics were brutal but simple. He could save them all, but it would require techniques he'd learned in specialized rescue training that most firefighters never received. Techniques that would reveal exactly how skilled he really was. He made the choice the same way he'd made it 6 years ago, by refusing to let anyone die on his watch. The descent became a carefully choreographed dance of rope work and physics, lowering each person individually while the building groaned and swayed around them. On the 4th trip, with the last victim secured against his chest, he heard the distinctive crack of structural failure. The building was coming down. He had seconds to clear the collapse zone, and the only way out was a controlled fall that would either save them both or kill them trying. They hit the ground hard as Conference Building C folded in on itself like a house of cards. Ethan rolled to absorb the impact, protecting the unconscious security guard with his body, while debris rained around them. When the dust settled, they were alive, battered, burned, and barely breathing, but alive. The crowd of firefighters and paramedics that swarmed them felt like a ticker tape parade. He'd done it again, saved people who would have died without him. And once again, it felt like the worst kind of victory. In the aftermath, as paramedics checked him for injuries and reporters shouted questions from behind police tape, Ethan found himself scanning the crowd for Alex. She stood near the command vehicle, talking intensely with someone in an expensive suit who definitely wasn't local emergency personnel. The man had the bearing of corporate security, all sharp angles and careful observation. When he spotted Ethan looking, Alex's face went pale. She said something quick to the suited man, then started walking towards the ambulance where Ethan sat. But before she could reach him, the man in the suit spoke into his phone, and everything changed. 3 black SUVs arrived within minutes, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested federal training. Men in dark clothes and serious expressions emerged, forming a protective perimeter around Alex like she was a head of state rather than a small-town tourist. The man in the suit approached her with the deference of someone addressing a superior. "Ms. Hamilton, we need to get you out of here. The situation has become too public." Hamilton. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Alexandra Hamilton, CEO of Hamilton Industries, one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. He'd seen her face on magazine covers, business journals, financial news programs. The woman he'd been falling in love with was a billionaire. The mysterious tourist who'd charmed his daughter and fixed his coffee maker and taught origami with an engineer's precision was one of the most powerful executives in the country. Alexandra, caught his stare across the chaos of emergency vehicles and media crews. Her blue eyes were bright with tears, and her mouth formed words he couldn't hear over the distance and noise. But he didn't need to hear them to understand. Everything between them had been built on a lie. The next few hours passed in a blur of interviews and medical checks and phone calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. The story was already spreading across social media. Mystery hero saves tech CEO in dramatic mountain rescue. Photos of him carrying Alexandra Hamilton from the burning building were being shared thousands of times, complete with speculation about their relationship and his background. The quiet life he'd built in Pine Ridge was dissolving in real time, replaced by the kind of attention that would make normal existence impossible. Zoe found him sitting on their back porch near midnight, staring at the harmonica in his hands like it held answers to questions he couldn't articulate. She settled beside him with the careful movements of someone who understood that adults sometimes broke in ways that couldn't be fixed with bandages. "The lady on TV said Alex is really rich and important." Her voice was small, careful. "Does that mean she can't be our friend anymore?" The question was so innocent, so perfectly aimed at the heart of everything wrong with the situation, that Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. "I don't know, kiddo." He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and soccer practice sweat. Sometimes adults make things complicated when they don't need to be. Zoe leaned against him with the complete trust of someone who'd never had reason to doubt that her father would figure everything out eventually. But Ethan wasn't sure he could figure this out. How did you process learning that someone you'd started to love had been lying about everything from the moment you met? The media attention intensified over the next week like a slow-building storm. Reporters camped outside their house, asking neighbors about Ethan's background and Zoe's school routine. Someone leaked his employment records, revealing his history with the Seattle Fire Department and the circumstances of Anna's death. The story took on a life of its own. Heroic single father with tragic past saves billionaire heiress in dramatic rescue. It was the kind of narrative that sold magazines and generated clicks. Never mind the human cost of having your private pain dissected for public consumption. Marcus Webb arrived on Thursday morning with the kind of entrance designed to intimidate. The black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to Ethan's house, followed by a sedan full of men in identical dark suits. Webb himself was tall and thin, with prematurely grey hair and the predatory stillness of someone accustomed to getting his way through carefully applied pressure. He introduced himself as head of security for Hamilton Industries and made it clear that this was not a social call. They sat in Ethan's living room while men with earpieces positioned themselves around the property like sentries. "Mr. Blake, I'll be direct. Ms. Hamilton is going through a difficult period that requires professional management. The media attention from your recent interaction has created complications for her recovery." Webb's voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd delivered similar speeches many times before. "We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your discretion regarding any personal relationship you may believe existed between you and Ms. Hamilton." The offer was both insulting and tempting. Enough money to secure Zoe's college education and pay off the mortgage, all in exchange for pretending that the last month hadn't happened. "What kind of difficult period?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Webb's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Ms. Hamilton has been under tremendous stress in her professional role. When people in her position experience breakdown, they sometimes make choices that seem rational in the moment, but require correction later. Her decision to vacation in Pine Ridge was one such choice." The implication was clear. Alexandra's time in their town, her interest in him and Zoe, everything they'd shared was being reframed as mental illness requiring management. "She seemed perfectly rational to me," Ethan said carefully. "Rational enough to help coordinate a rescue operation last week?" Webb's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Yes, we've reviewed the footage from that incident. Ms. Hamilton displayed concerning familiarity with emergency protocols, as if she'd been preparing for such a situation. Combined with her unauthorized absence from her corporate responsibilities, this suggests someone who's lost touch with appropriate boundaries." The words were clinical, designed to pathologize behavior that had seemed natural and helpful in the moment. Webb leaned forward with the confidence of someone delivering a killing blow. "We've also reviewed your background, Mr. Blake. The incident 6 years ago where you chose to complete a rescue operation instead of responding to your wife's emergency call. Some might call that heroic. Others might suggest it demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment regarding personal relationships. The attack was surgical in its precision, designed to hit exactly where Ethan was most vulnerable. The guilt he'd carried for 6 years, weaponized by a stranger who'd done his homework. My wife died because of a structural collapse, not because of any choice I made, Ethan said, but the words felt hollow even to him. Webb nodded with false sympathy. Of course, but perception matters, especially when it comes to someone in Ms. Hamilton's position. The optics of her becoming involved with someone whose judgment has been questionable would be damaging to her reputation and her company's stock price. It was a threat wrapped in concern, delivered with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. The conversation ended with Webb leaving a check on the coffee table and a business card with a phone number. 24 hours to consider our offer, Mr. Blake. After that, we'll be forced to pursue other methods of protecting Ms. Hamilton's interests. The words hung in the air long after the black vehicles disappeared down Pine Ridge's main street. Ethan sat in his empty living room, staring at a check with more zeros than he'd ever seen in one place, wondering when his life had become the kind of story that required protection from men in expensive suits. That evening, Zoe asked if Alex would be coming to her soccer game on Saturday. The question was casual, but her eyes held the careful hope of someone who'd gotten used to disappointment. I don't think so, kiddo. Alex has to go back to her regular life. The explanation felt like a lie, even though it was technically true. How did you tell a 12-year-old that the adult world was full of people who turned love into leverage and happiness into a commodity to be managed? Friday morning brought the news that changed everything. Pine Ridge Elementary School was on fire, and Zoe was inside. The call came at 7:45 a.m., just as Ethan was finishing his first cup of coffee and preparing for another day of dodging reporters. The voice on the other end belonged to Principal Martinez, usually calm, but now edged with the kind of panic that made strong people sound like frightened children. Ethan, we need you here. Now. There's been an electrical fire in the main building, and we can't account for all the students. The drive to the school took 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. Smoke was visible from 5 blocks away, a black column rising into the clear Montana sky like a signal fire. Emergency vehicles crowded the parking lot, but Ethan could see immediately that they were overwhelmed. The volunteer fire department was doing their best, but the building was older than most of the equipment trying to fight the blaze. Children and teachers clustered in the playground area, being checked off against class rosters, while parents arrived in various states of controlled panic. Ethan found Principal Martinez near the command vehicle, her gray hair disheveled and her normally pristine clothes stained with smoke. "Where's Zoe?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, but fear had stripped away his ability to modulate tone. Martinez pointed toward the main building with a shaking hand. "She was in the library for early tutoring. We got most of the kids out, but the East Wing corridor collapsed before we could reach that section. Fire department says it's too dangerous to send anyone else in." Looking at the burning school building, Ethan felt the same cold calculation that had guided him through hundreds of emergency calls. The structure was older brick and timber construction, built in an era when fire safety meant thick walls and high ceilings rather than modern suppression systems. The East Wing was cut off by fallen debris, but there were exterior windows that could provide access if someone had the skills to reach them. The volunteer crew was focused on defensive operations, protecting the rest of the building rather than attempting rescue in the most dangerous section. "How many kids?" he asked, already mentally mapping approach routes and escape options. 3 students and Ms. Peterson, the librarian. They're on the 2nd floor, east side. Martinez grabbed his arm with surprising strength for someone in her 60s. "Ethan, the fire chief already said it's too dangerous. You can't—" But he was already moving toward his truck, toward the gear bag that had saved lives a week ago and might need to do it again, toward the choice between safety and doing what needed to be done. Alexandra appeared beside his truck, like she'd materialized from the smoke itself. She wore tactical gear that looked military surplus, with equipment that definitely wasn't available at Pine Ridge's hardware store. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes held the kind of focused intensity he'd seen in combat veterans. "Don't try to stop me," Ethan said, pulling rope and harness from his bag. "That's my daughter in there." Alexandra nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I'm going with you." "Like hell you are." He turned to face her fully, taking in the professional-grade rescue equipment she wore like she'd been born to it. "This isn't some corporate team-building exercise. People die in situations like this." Her smile was sharp and humorless. "People die in Afghanistan too, but I managed 4 tours as a combat engineer before I inherited a company I never wanted. You need someone who knows building structures and emergency demolition. I'm the best you're going to find in the next 5 minutes." The revelation hit him like cold water, recontextualizing everything he thought he knew about Alexandra Hamilton. Not just a billionaire heiress, but a veteran with actual combat experience. Someone who'd earned her engineering knowledge in the worst possible conditions and survived to build an empire. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, securing his harness with movements made automatic by repetition. "Would it have mattered? You were already decided I was lying about everything that counted. There wasn't time to unpack the accusation or the hurt behind it." Smoke was pouring from the second-floor windows, where Zoe and 3 other children were trapped. They approached the building from the north side, where structural damage was minimal and exterior access was possible. Alexandra moved with the same fluid efficiency she'd shown during the resort fire, reading the building's bones like someone who'd spent years predicting how structures failed under stress. "Main support beam is compromised, but the exterior wall should hold our weight if we distribute it properly." The climb was technically challenging, but not impossible for someone with Ethan's skills and Alexandra's engineering knowledge. She guided him toward stress points that would support their ascent while avoiding areas where the building's structural integrity was questionable. They worked together with the kind of wordless coordination that came from shared training and mutual trust. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the lies and the hurt and the impossibility of their situation, they moved like partners who'd been saving lives together for years. The second-floor library was a scene from a disaster movie. Smoke hung thick enough to cut, and the temperature was rising toward levels that would soon become unsurvivable. They found the children and Ms. Peterson huddled near the far windows, conscious but suffering from smoke inhalation. Zoe's face was streaked with tears and soot, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Dad, I knew you'd come." The simple faith in her voice broke something loose in his chest. She'd never doubted that he would find a way to reach her. Getting 4 people down from a burning building required improvisation and teamwork that pushed both their skills to the limit. Alexandra rigged anchor points, while Ethan secured each child for descent, their movements coordinated by the kind of professional trust that transcended personal complications. Ms. Peterson went first, then the 2 other students, each lowering, taking precious minutes while the building groaned and settled around them. Zoe insisted on going last, displaying the kind of stubborn courage that reminded him painfully of Anna. As he prepared Zoe for the final descent, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Dad, is Alex really rich and famous like they said on TV?" The question was so perfectly Zoe. Direct, honest, focused on what mattered rather than what adults thought was important. "Yeah, kiddo, she really is." Zoe considered this information with the seriousness of someone who'd learned that the world was more complicated than it seemed. "Does that mean she doesn't like us anymore?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything wrong with adult relationships. "I think she likes us just fine," Ethan said, glancing at Alexandra as she monitored their rope system with professional concentration. Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they don't need to be. Alexandra's eyes met his across the smoke-filled room, and for a moment the pretenses fell away completely. Whatever else was true, whatever lies had been told or truths withheld, she was here. She'd shown up when it mattered most, putting herself at risk to help save the people he loved most in the world. The descent went smoothly until they were 20 feet from the ground, and the building's east wall began to fail. The structural collapse happened in slow motion, bricks and timber shifting with the inexorable weight of physics and fire damage. Alexandra shouted a warning just as debris began raining around them. Ethan wrapped himself around Zoe, using his body as a shield while they swung away from the collapsing wall. They hit the ground hard but alive, rolling away from the building as the entire east wing folded in on itself like a house of cards. In the aftermath, as paramedics checked Zoe for injuries and Principal Martinez cried with relief, Ethan found himself sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance with Alexandra beside him. They were both covered in soot and ash, their expensive rescue gear reduced to smoke-stained rags. The media was already arriving, drawn by the story of a billionaire CEO and a local hero saving children from a burning school. But for the moment, they had a pocket of relative quiet in the chaos of emergency response. 4 tours in Afghanistan, he said, not quite making it a question. Alexandra nodded, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Combat engineer, like I said. I was good at it. Better than I ever was at running a company I inherited from a father who never thought I'd amount to anything. Her voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting facts that had been painful for so long they'd become simply true. When I came back, Hamilton Industries was failing. Fixing it seemed easier than fixing myself. Why Pine Ridge? The question had been eating at him since Webb's visit, since learning that Alexandra's presence in their town hadn't been the accident she'd claimed. Because you were here. The answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. I've been following your career since Seattle. What happened to your wife? How you left firefighting? Where you ended up? When I needed to disappear for a while, this seemed like the right place. It was another lie, or maybe the first complete truth she'd told him. Either way, it changed everything. The revelation that she'd come to Pine Ridge specifically because of him recontextualized every interaction they'd shared. The convenient plumbing emergency, the perfect timing of their meetings, her knowledge of emergency protocols. All of it had been orchestrated by someone with the resources to research his background and stage encounters that felt natural. You played me, he said, and the words tasted like ash. From the very beginning, everything was manipulation. Alexandra turned to face him fully, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. It started that way. I won't lie to you anymore, Ethan. I came here because I was curious about the man who'd sacrificed everything to save strangers. But staying, falling in love with you and Zoe, wanting to build something real, that was never part of any plan. Her voice broke slightly on the last words. I've never been as happy as I was these past few weeks, pretending to be someone who could belong in your world. You didn't have to pretend. The words came out before he could stop them, carrying more truth than he'd intended to reveal. The woman who taught Zoe origami and fixed my coffee maker and showed up to help save children, that person was real, regardless of your bank account. Alexandra's smile was sad and beautiful, and full of the kind of regret that came from understanding how completely they'd misunderstood each other. Was she? Because I'm not sure I know the difference between Alexandra Hamilton and Alex from Pine Ridge anymore. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marcus Webb and his security team. The black SUVs pulled up with the same coordinated precision they'd shown before, but this time Webb emerged with the grim efficiency of someone who'd run out of patience for subtle approaches. He surveyed the scene. Alexandra in tactical gear sitting beside a soot-covered plumber while media crews captured every moment. And his expression suggested that subtle diplomacy was no longer on the table. "Mrs. Hamilton, this has gone far enough." Webb's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to obedience from people who controlled billion-dollar corporations. "The board has expressed serious concerns about your recent behavior. Your presence here today, putting yourself at risk for a publicity stunt, demonstrates exactly the kind of poor judgment we've been discussing." His dismissal of the rescue as a publicity stunt was calculated to wound, and Ethan felt Alexandra flinch beside him. "It wasn't a publicity stunt," Ethan said, standing to put himself between Webb and Alexandra. "She helped save 4 people, including my daughter. Whatever else is true, that matters." Webb's smile was sharp and cold, the expression of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Mr. Blake, I'm afraid your opinion is irrelevant here. Miss Hamilton has responsibilities that extend far beyond your small-town concerns. She'll be returning to Seattle immediately for evaluation and treatment." "Treatment for what?" Alexandra's voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the undercurrent of fear. Webb pulled out a tablet and began reading from what was obviously a prepared statement. "The board has voted to invoke the mental health clause in your employment contract. Your recent behavior, abandoning corporate responsibilities, engaging in dangerous activities, forming inappropriate personal relationships, demonstrates a clear pattern of psychological distress requiring professional intervention. The corporate coup was happening in real time, disguised as concern for Alexandra's well-being, but obviously designed to remove her from power while she was vulnerable." Ethan had seen enough workplace politics to recognize a hostile takeover when it wore a psychiatric mask. "You can't just kidnap someone because you don't like their personal choices," he said, though he suspected that someone with Webb's resources probably could do exactly that. "We're not kidnapping anyone," Webb replied with the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "Ms. Hamilton will voluntarily submit to evaluation, or the board will be forced to declare her incompetent and assume direct control of her assets. Either way, her association with this situation ends today." The threat was elegantly simple: cooperate or lose everything. It was the kind of choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Alexandra stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone approaching a dangerous animal. "How long have you been planning this, Marcus? Since I refused your advice about the Portland acquisition. Since I started asking questions about the defense contracts." Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see her hands shaking slightly. Webb's expression didn't change, but something satisfied flickered in his eyes. "The board simply wants what's best for the company, Ms. Hamilton. Your recent instability has made decisive action necessary." "Give me 24 hours," Alexandra said suddenly. "To wrap up my affairs here, say goodbye properly. Then I'll come back willingly and submit to whatever evaluation you want." Webb considered the request with the calculating expression of someone weighing risks and benefits. 12 hours, and you'll remain under security supervision to ensure your safety." The negotiation was over before it started, the outcome predetermined by superior resources and legal positioning. As Webb's team prepared to leave, Alexandra caught Ethan's arm with desperate intensity. "Take care of yourself and Zoe. Don't let them make you feel guilty for being a hero." The words were clearly meant as goodbye, but they carried an undercurrent that suggested this wasn't over. "What about you?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I'll figure something out. I always do." Her smile was brave and heartbreaking and completely unconvincing. That evening, after the media crews had moved on to other stories and Pine Ridge had returned to its normal quiet rhythm, Ethan sat on his back porch with Zoe beside him. She'd been unusually subdued since the morning's events, processing the reality that the woman who'd become part of their family was about to disappear from their lives. "Is Alex in trouble, Dad?" The question was careful, the way children asked about things they sensed were too complicated for simple answers. "Yeah, kiddo, I think she is." Ethan pulled Zoe closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering smoke from the school fire. Sometimes when people have a lot of money and power, other people try to control them. Alex is dealing with that kind of problem right now. It was a simplified explanation, but Zoe was smart enough to understand the basic injustice of the situation. "Can't we help her?" Zoe's voice carried the same determination that had kept her calm during the fire rescue. "I mean, she helped save me today. Doesn't that mean we should help save her?" The question was so perfectly logical, so beautifully simple in its moral clarity, that Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. She was right, of course. Alexandra had risked her life to help save children, including his daughter. The least he could do was try to return the favor. "Maybe we can, kiddo. Let me think about it." But even as he said the words, Ethan wasn't sure what help he could offer against corporate lawyers and security teams with unlimited resources. He was a small-town plumber who'd once been a firefighter. What could someone like him do against people who controlled billion-dollar companies and had the law on their side? The answer came at 3 a.m. when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Alexandra's voice was whisper-quiet, obviously trying not to be overheard. "Ethan, I need you to listen carefully. Webb's people are planning something for tomorrow that goes beyond just taking me back to Seattle. They've been embezzling from company pension funds, using my absence to cover their tracks. I have evidence, but I need to get it to the FBI before they can discredit me completely. Where are you?" He was already reaching for his clothes, his mind automatically shifting into emergency response mode. "The Hamilton cabin on Glacier Lake. They think I'm sedated, but I palmed the pills. I've got maybe an hour before they realize I'm not unconscious." Her voice was steady but urgent, the tone of someone operating on borrowed time. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. I got myself into this mess. Zoe's at her friend Sarah's house for a sleepover. I can be there in 40 minutes. The decision felt automatic, like muscle memory from a life when helping people in danger was his job rather than his choice. "What do you need me to do?" Alexandra's relief was audible even through the phone connection. "Just get me to the FBI field office in Missoula. I've got everything we need to put Webb and his people away, but only if I can stay free long enough to deliver it." The drive to Glacier Lake took 35 minutes of careful navigation on mountain roads, designed more for scenery than speed. The Hamilton cabin turned out to be a sprawling log structure that probably cost more than most people's houses, set on a private peninsula with helicopter access and enough security equipment to protect a small country. Alexandra was waiting in the tree line, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a backpack that looked like it held more than vacation supplies. "How did you get past the security?" Ethan asked as she slipped into his truck with the fluid movements of someone accustomed to moving quietly in dangerous situations. "I designed most of their systems when I was trying to upgrade company security. Turns out knowing how something works makes it easier to circumvent." Her smile was grim but satisfied, the expression of someone who'd just outmaneuvered people who'd underestimated her capabilities. The drive to Missoula normally took 2 hours, but they made it in 90 minutes of careful driving on back roads that avoided main highways and traffic cameras. Alexandra spent the time on her laptop, compiling evidence files and sending encrypted copies to journalists and federal investigators. "Insurance," she explained when Ethan asked about the multiple transmissions. "If something happens to us, at least the truth will get out." The FBI field office was a nondescript building in downtown Missoula that could have housed any government agency or corporate headquarters. Special Agent Jennifer Torres met them in the parking garage, a woman in her 40s with the kind of alert competence that came from years of dealing with white-collar crime. "Ms. Hamilton, we've been hoping you'd contact us. Your assistant reached out 3 weeks ago with some interesting allegations about financial irregularities at your company. The meeting that followed was a masterclass in federal investigation techniques. Agent Torres and her team went through Alexandra's evidence with the methodical precision of people who'd built careers on attention to detail. Financial records, email communications, recorded phone calls, years of carefully documented proof that Webb and several board members had been systematically looting Hamilton Industries while positioning themselves to take control of the company. "This is enough for multiple indictments," Torres said after reviewing the core evidence files. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, probably RICO charges if we can prove the pattern extends far enough. You've done excellent work documenting this, Ms. Hamilton." Alexandra's relief was obvious, though she tried to maintain the composed facade that probably served her well in boardroom negotiations. "What happens now? Now we arrest the people responsible, and you go back to running your company," Torres replied, with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed taking down financial criminals. "We'll coordinate with Seattle PD to execute warrants simultaneously. Webb and his associates will be in custody before they realize what's happening." It was the kind of swift justice that rarely happened in corporate crime cases, made possible by Alexandra's meticulous documentation and willingness to cooperate. The drive back to Pine Ridge felt different than their desperate escape 12 hours earlier. Alexandra was quiet, staring out the window at the Montana landscape she'd grown to love during her brief time as a small-town tourist. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked as they reached the outskirts of town. "Go back to being a billionaire CEO, I suppose. Try to rebuild a company that almost got destroyed by people I trusted. That's not what I meant." He pulled over at the scenic overlook where Pine Ridge spread out below them like a postcard of small-town America. "What will you do about us? About this?" His gesture encompassed the space between them, the complicated relationship that had survived lies and corporate conspiracies, and the kind of dramatic rescues that belonged in movies rather than real life. Alexandra turned to face him fully, her blue eyes serious but hopeful. "I was thinking about what Zoe said yesterday, about helping people who helped us. Maybe it's time for Hamilton Industries to open a rural development office, somewhere in Montana, focused on supporting small towns that need investment but not exploitation." Her smile was tentative but genuine. Of course, that would require someone to run the Montana operations, someone who understands small-town life and emergency management and how to make complicated things simple. "Are you offering me a job?" The question came out more amused than surprised. After everything they'd been through, the idea of Alexandra trying to solve their relationship problems with corporate solutions was perfectly in character. "I'm offering you a partnership, professional and personal, if you're interested. No more lies, no more pretending to be someone else. Just Alexandra and Ethan figuring out how to build something real together." The offer was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Working with Alexandra would mean leaving his simple life as Pine Ridge's only plumber, stepping into a world of corporate responsibility and public attention that had already proven dangerous. But it would also mean building something meaningful with someone who'd proven she was willing to risk everything for the people she loved. "What about Zoe?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Zoe comes with us, obviously. There are excellent schools in Seattle, or we could arrange for remote learning if she wants to stay in Montana. Whatever works best for her." Alexandra's planning was thorough and thoughtful, the approach of someone who'd learned to consider all stakeholders in any major decision. "I've gotten used to having both of you in my life. I'm not interested in going back to a world where that's not possible." 6 months later, Ethan stood in the main conference room of Hamilton Industries' new Rural Development Division, looking out at the Missoula skyline while reviewing grant applications from small towns across the Mountain West. The Montana office had become everything Alexandra had promised, a way to use corporate resources to support communities that needed help without losing their character. It was meaningful work that combined his emergency management background with Alexandra's business expertise and engineering knowledge. Zoe adapted to their new life, with the resilience that had carried her through her mother's death and her father's career change. She split her time between Missoula's advanced STEM programs and weekend trips to Pine Ridge, where she maintained her friendships and her position on the soccer team. Their family had grown and evolved in ways that honored the past while embracing possibilities they'd never imagined when Alexandra was just Alex from out of town. The romantic relationship between Ethan and Alexandra developed slowly, built on the foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect, rather than the dramatic intensity of their first meeting. They worked together during the day and went home to their respective houses in the evening, dating like normal adults rather than characters in an adventure movie. It was ordinary and domestic, and occasionally wonderful in ways that felt sustainable rather than exhausting. On quiet Sunday evenings, when Zoe was doing homework and Alexandra was reading business journals, Ethan sometimes played his harmonica on the back deck of their Missoula house. The music drifted across the neighborhood, mixing with the sounds of normal family life, dinnertime conversations, television programs, children playing in backyards. It was the kind of simple happiness he'd stopped believing was possible after Anna's death, proof that love could indeed be built on honesty and shared purpose rather than rescue and crisis. The harmonica that had once represented guilt and loss had become something else entirely, a bridge between past and future, a reminder that music could heal even the deepest wounds when it was played with patience and hope. Anna would have approved, he thought. She'd always believed that the best way to honor the dead was to keep living, to find new forms of love that didn't diminish what came before, but simply added new melodies to the ongoing song of a life well lived.